podcast, and this is a show for founders, operators, and builders who are building at the intersection of tech and business. If you are working in Web3, AI, or anything which is next, then this is a show for you because today we have one of very special operators slash founders who's building in the Web3 space since quite some time. He's also been leading some of the top L2s in the space, and he also in his past life been professor. So today we are going to talk about what it takes to build actual startup in Web3 and how to go through different levels to this game. Of course, Jason, our guest today, has been to some of these ventures. So I would really love to talk about some angles about business, how he built Cesto. We'll talk more about Cesto, of course, and basically any operating principle that our audience, which is early stage founders, can extract or steal from Jason. So Jason, welcome to the episode, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Mayur. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So maybe like why don't you start about like a brief introduction about yourself and how you came to building Cesto.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a bit about me. I mean, I've worn a few different hats across the course of my career. I started out in semiconductor research. I used to be a frontline researcher for chips that go into data centers, following which I moved into more of a operator slash founder role. Built a company before this, and then moved into the crypto space, where I was first at a layer one blockchain called Celo. Pretty early days, and worked on that for a good amount of time. Scaled it up. We built a product there called MiniPay, which is a consumer crypto wallet that's really popular. Has over 15 million monthly active users. Currently, like owned by Opera. And aside from that, was also head of operations at StarkWare. And where the idea for Cesto really came from for us was in observing patterns in our own life. So when I was growing up, one of the things I observed was that it was very hard for us to find really meaningful opportunities that people could, move capital around and plug into. You had to go through a series of steps. Cross-border remittances where you would lose money, more like moving money across accounts, bundling that with locating the best opportunities, and then after that, just constantly monitoring them if there's any opportunities for rebalance. The world started moving a lot faster, but somehow it's 2026 and that side of the world is still largely non-existent. I have parents that consume news on YouTube, TikTok. I know people from all over. In fact, today I was taking a cab and I saw like the cab driver was like watching news about the US. This is us sitting in me heading to my offsite in India. And the thing that caught my eye is like all this information is democratized. But why isn't the opportunity and the access to actually being able to plug your money the same way? And we believe, like at Cesto, we're on a mission to end one size fits all finance. And our vision is that more and more of this grassroots access is going to become a more tangible reality in the next few years. And I think it's in products like Cesto, and built on top of Solana, like that enable products like these to actually see the face of the earth in some sense.
Amazing. So just to talk about Cesto, so once we land on your website and once we see how the platform looks like, most of the shared basket, of course, we can talk about basket later, but those baskets of assets are called things like Nancy Pelosi, Tracker, Inverse Grammar, and Trump Pump. So which basket out of all of this has actually pulled the most dollars in, maybe in terms of like considering the returns from the retail users, and was it the one that you as a founder, like at the back of your mind, expected to perform that much?
Fantastic. Happy to share what this also looks like and feels like. So, to your question, Mayur, about which baskets are most popular, one thing we've observed is that depending on the audience, most people end up entering their basket that they like directly. And it's a very common pattern that we see. In addition, I think like currently the most popular ones are like the Nancy Pelosi tracker. people recognize us by the brand and the image associated. One of the ways in which this differs is that the user owns all of the assets. So imagine where you own a specific basket, but now you could lend the basket and borrow against it. That suddenly makes this a very unique and interesting product. And this is kept live at all points in time, so you can always have like really good impact. A second most popular one happens to be the AI bubble hedge. Given people are already seeing very specific. Day before yesterday, this was the most popular one, the Leopold tracker, but obviously, like things have been changing, and yeah, we're super excited, as you can tell, about the different ways in which we can tell a story through these baskets and through the world representations. I think baskets inherently are a container that are basically stories that can be bundled together and be told in different ways. And in fact, like fun fact, the word cesto actually means basket in Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese.
Nice. Yeah. So just for our general audience, when people hear about baskets, especially when it comes to investing equities, then basically the bundle of different assets, and those assets could be like you mentioned that could be like from a specific industry or vertical, or according to their level of interest, they can pretty much pile up those assets and then create a basket, right? So how the Cesto baskets, would be traditionally different from like, other TradFi assets or, TradFi asset baskets?
Yeah, 100%. So the way in which these assets differ from traditional finance assets is that they're largely available 24/7. So unlike traditional financial instruments that have market close and open time, a lot of these assets now have the ability to be traded outside of market hours. So suddenly it makes it very interesting because now you have news that comes up after hours that you're now able to actually participate in. So that makes it a superior product because a lot of the times, if you're buying a traditional finance product like an ETF, etc., that was invented in the 90s, but doesn't keep up with the different kinds of assets that are available out there. Second big benefit is that you can now natively lend, borrow, leverage, and stake against these assets. So what that does is it unlocks new types of financial primitives that previously did not exist. And this suddenly means that maybe you're a person sitting in India and have like access to the gold basket, but you also want to buy a house. You can now borrow stables against it and then go and leverage and buy a house. And then in addition to that, there's also the side benefit that it's global from day one. It's easier for companies to IPO, which means that you're going to have access to newfound assets like global stocks and pre-IPO stocks, etc., that come live. Currently, there's over 16,000 assets that are available in the network on top of Solana, given the kind of talent they've been attracting, etc., that create really interesting opportunities to like now be bundled. And we believe that the surface area of opportunity when you start bundling is infinitely more than the parts. And what I mean by that is, if you think about an individual asset or a ticker, that's just one way to represent a worldview. If you like AI, you'd buy Nvidia. If you like cars, you may go buy like Tesla Motors. But now those are only just one or two odd ways that you can represent a worldview. What a lot of intelligent investors end up doing is they'll buy like positions across the stack. They'll buy cloud, they'll buy data centers, and a whole host of others in order to balance out their portfolio. And that is the kind of world that isn't typically available or accessible to a lot of retail investors. And that is the world we want to create over time, is something that actually has true empowerment for people to represent their worldviews, their opinions, their ideas in a container, in a format that actually makes sense to them, if that makes sense.
For sure, amazing. So, Jason, you've also been inside Celo, and right now, Celo, maybe it's safe to say that could be considered as one of the top, L1s throughout your experience working at Celo. Can you also tell us, a little bit about what were some things that you typically learn, especially like for your founder's journey, so that you know about the difference between usage value and how much of that lesson has been used to build Cesto?
Yeah, 100%. I think Celo presented a very, very good opportunity to learn and grow at a really, really fast pace. It was like drinking water out of the fire hose because every week I was learning something new, driving towards something completely novel, and building something completely like new. It's like firefighting, but while you're jumping out of a plane and like building a parachute on the way down. I think early stage startups are definitely quite exhilarating. For me, particularly as a person that came from a background in research, working with these people that had previously sold a company to GoDaddy and Google, and then like working and hiring a team that came out of like Berkeley, Stanford, and like a whole host of others, created a very, very, very enthralling experience for me. It helped me really think about the world with very large glasses of ambition, I would say, compared to how I viewed it before that. And so I think that was the main unlock. We hired a lot of entrepreneurs. It's this like questions got me thinking, like very excited about it. We hired a lot of ex entrepreneurs and founders, as well as people who we knew were going to be founders in the future. And the culture itself was very entrepreneurial. You could go and start something, build something internally, or you could go out and start a company. And somehow I knew that there were going to be a lot of startups that came out of it. And lo and behold, I wasn't wrong. There were at least 20 companies that came out of a cohort of maybe 110 or 150 founders, 150 operators that had been hired, which is nuts. Like that's a crazy conversion rate. And so yeah, I personally think that more companies, in fact, at Cesto, that's another thing that we've been very intentional about building the culture of, is finding go-getters who think about the world in a really structured way, and have an opinionated worldview. I would be super happy if employees that came into Cesto decided to go and start companies. That's the culture I want to build for sure.
So basically, if we have to sum it up, then those journey enable you to widen your horizon and basically uh, take a take a look at the world through a entrepreneur lens, which is amazing, right? So just to double down on the origin of how Cesto started, from the maybe napkin stage idea to MVP, and then the product evolution. So why this product really matters to you, and why do you think that now is a perfect times to build, especially within the Solana ecosystem? Did you see that maybe after pump.fun, like the whole retail space started to move fast, and then people, I mean, in terms of culture of not just crypto Twitter, but maybe also from some mature investors really needed something like Cesto. So what was that mindset when you had this idea?
Yeah, 100%. So for us, I think it came from a few different angles, and maybe I'll address the question on timing first. So first things first, I think the sentiment was ripe for a product like this to actually make it into market. The sentiment around Pump and a few other products really paved the way for very clearly for more fundamentals driven like approach to investing. I think retail audiences definitely wanted something slightly different, something with a little more substance that gave them, and that suddenly unlocked a lot. The growth and proliferation of products like prediction markets, perpetual futures, and retail equity tokens or tokenized equities that came on chain suddenly created again a very large access pool that you can now choose from. So think of this as sort of paintbrushes that you have to paint a canvas. So now suddenly you have a more. It's like going from 720p to 4K in terms of resolution to be able to represent a worldview. I don't think the markets have fundamentally calibrated to it just yet. And that I think is where the opportunity lies. And to us, it's clear as broad daylight that this is where the next decade worth of like values to be created, and that's why we're taking a calculated, almost generational bet on why we think this is going to be huge.
Awesome. So probably around July 2025, correct me if I'm wrong, you took an honorable mention from Colosseum's AI track, which is I would say like a significant achievement to be considered. And 11 or 12 months later, you won the frontier out of another probably around 2,800 projects. So what specifically changed in the product between those submission, and what was that maybe element that you have to cut to get there?
Absolutely. So I think what the untold story that often comes up is that, uh, many people tell us, hey, you guys made it when you got funded by Colosseum. I think that certainly is like one of the worldviews. But I think the hard things that no one talks about is kind of the path you used to get there. And we ended up getting not one but two separate like submissions that got honorable mentions. And we were like, we were super disheartened by the end of the second one. And we had pivoted about two times to ensure that, okay, we had like a clear worldview on where it was headed. And somehow I felt like the conviction that I had on the market that we were heading into wasn't giving as much clarity at the time. This was like about, I want to say, like 6 to 8 months ago. And then out of nowhere, there's a few variables and factors that changed very quickly. Typically with startups, I mean, you have to be bang right on timing, almost early. Early is the right like way to look at it. Uber was not on time; they were early, and then eventually like the market caught on. Same for Google. Same for like all of these startups, right? And so the way I view it, I think for us, the RWAs starting to pick up was one of the macro changes that really led to this being like the optimum time for Colosseum to take like a massive bet, as well as Solana ecosystem to now see what we were trying to do. And then second, I think from a worldview of what changed, well, we started iterating quite quickly in public as opposed to starting out, with a closed beta and working with users. So right now, most of our users actually give us feedback in public. So this actually led to a very interesting flywheel where the sheer volume of feedback that we receive that's happening in public now leads to other people like, community members, investors, like users that come in and they're like, oh, what are these people cooking up? I think I'd like to be a part of that. And so I think that was really, really important. So we spent a lot of time thinking through brand. We got like the person that built Chainlink's brand. Like Chainlink is a $10 billion company to actually like develop some of the key elements of our um, colors and brands and schemes to make sure that the logo actually resonates with a lot of people as well. And so I think all of these things came together. Fortunately, because of the network I'd had from like previous work, finding such people was not the hard part. It was more like the bringing it all together and executing it in a way that's like clean. I think is definitely challenging. One of the things I will point out is we realized pretty quickly that we weren't gonna like need any through the 8 week or I think 4 or 5 week period. We realized pretty quickly that okay, this is taking off, and we need to just double down and go hard at it. And it's a very hard call to take as a founder sometimes. And when we realized that, I think the winning or losing really did not matter. And so at that point, I think we knew that hey, this is happening. It's just a matter of like being in front of the right eyes at the right time, but it is happening for sure.
Awesome. So I really love that approach, and just to just to end my uh, this portion about the original and pivot and how you think about startups. So I've interviewed almost like 10 to 12 different founders. Some of them were building in Web3, some of them were in traditional Web2 tech space. So when you think about building a startup, let's say very early stage, so there's two different approaches. One is like you do anything, and with the brute force you chase nothing but the revenue. But then on the other hand, for some people they are building some either product or service which requires them to integrate like a lot of the resources which not every people have, especially in their early days. So what do you think about fundraising versus bootstrapping? Because with your experience with the Colosseum, and maybe like if you can share a little bit insight on that, if any other founders who are watching this want to have a discussion between which route would make more sense for them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think I can shed light having been through both journeys. Bootstrapping, like initial capital and liquidity, is a hard problem, and it takes a certain kind of like mentality to go after a market and say. So the analogy I like to give is like, can you assemble like if you're thinking about an arch, can you assemble it brick by brick? So the brick being, hey, like a customer's paying you, and like the one part of it just goes into like the fulfillment of what the customer is paying you for. Typically, agencies follow this model. Different businesses follow very similar models, right? And so this is relatively simplistic to understand, where you're saying whatever money comes in is going out to do this. This is our unit economics. Now, the problem with most startups is that they don't operate with this like fundamental business model. If you look at how many of these startups like entered escape velocity, they had different ways in which they arrived at that. But the one thing that was common is that they had like an extraordinary growth rate and really strong retention metrics, right? And when that is the case, and at that point you're trying to grow as quickly as you can, because that is fundamentally what allows you to differentiate yourself from competition and the like, right? And the way I think about it, capital that's injected in large amounts doesn't actually solve the problem that you need. So many a times, it's very common to walk into a conversation with an investor and be asked the question, "Hey, um, what what is your use of capital? Right? How are you going to use it?" And oftentimes, good answers sound like, "Hey, I, you know, we've cracked about 8 or 10 of these. There's going to be about 8 players that are entering the market. They're cornering the market. This capital would be allocated towards building that early network effect that prevents new competitors from coming in, or it allows us to corner a few of the resources such that we can then go and, or these are the growth tactics we've discovered that are free right now and have a very unique opportunity or unique window that we can go after them. Well, why don't we do that right now?" And so when you actually play it out, that turns out to be the strongest reason to go out and raise capital, as such. I think most businesses like misconstrue their need for it. I don't think everyone needs to go out and actually, it's a painful path. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. And having done both paths, I can tell you for a fact that most most companies are built brick by brick, and so you can actually focus on that.
Amazing. And Jason, I did have a chance to take a look at your personal website before doing this episode, because and some of those pieces really resonated, because it tells
Thank
me,
you.
like, from the 2 or 3 blocks that you are a systems thinker. Of course, like, first principle always comes in approach, but thinking about those systems, right? So especially at the stage that Cesto is now, how do you think about the distribution, especially your CAC to LTV ratio, or if not CAC to LTV, if it's too early, or how do you orchestrate that or, cost per acquisition?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I think firstly, I didn't realize, like, I haven't updated my blog in maybe like it's been a public website for like almost a decade now, and I haven't updated it for the last 3 or 4 years. So it's a good shout for me to actually go and like change it up a little bit to reflect like some of the stuff that I've been doing in the last few years. But I mean, got it. Yeah. So the way I view it with distribution, you have to distribution is like the only mode that actually matters right now. So the product you're building doesn't matter because you're competing with a bunch of people who, with a Claude Code subscription, an afternoon to spare, and enough motivation, will be able to replicate exactly what you're building. But where it gets really hard to do is once you have deeper moats that are present in your company. The way I think about it is like I start with the unit economics like basis from like day one. So day one, thinking about, okay, like if you're selling a specific type of transaction, what is the gross margin on it that you're actually going after? So if you break it down into like very specific set of like constituents, you'll realize, okay, you're allocating to these things. Then next goal is like, hey, can we reduce that further? Can we cram down that, like such that the user gets more value, or you're able to squeeze out like a larger portion of the thing? Typically, with most companies, most businesses, most things, right, the gross margin tends to be negative, but that doesn't make it a bad idea. It actually, in fact, makes it a really unassuming something that people would think about is like, okay, why is a person actually doing this? You know, 5 minute deliveries, as an example, very common out here. From a unit economics basis, early days don't actually make a lot of sense. Like, why on earth would so many shadow warehouses and like these many drivers, etc., like suddenly like make a lot of sense? But then once you play it out at a certain scale, which you can simulate these things and you can start to play, okay, if math like starts to get better, and if there's a warehouse every like 1 square mile radius or half square mile radius, and if these warehouses cover certain like SKU depth, so now you have like good enough breadth of reasons to believe that your gross margin keeps increasing little by little, right? And so over time you actually can build a compelling business. Now, if you apply that concept to how Cesto thinks about, or how we at Cesto think about it, our like main lifetime value of like a user using the product comes from the baskets that they pick up. So typically, what we find is that a user that comes in buys not one, but one and then like quickly buys a second basket. They rarely come back and say, hey, I didn't like that basket. I'm going to like exit it. So there's no such thing that occurs. It's always a person that comes in and thinks about it from day one, right? And so if you play this out over a reasonably large sample space, then um, the cost of creating a basket comes from like analysts and like all of these. So as long as the cost of that justifies your LTV, which is the X amount of average like basket spend that a person has, then you have like a viable business model that actually scales over time really really well. And bundle that with like customer acquisition cost that comes from either organic like founder led content and like different content engines that are like placed across different channels that we're starting to see early semblances of. We do over 100,000 impressions every single week. That's scaling up to now 1 million maybe in the next few months. And the way I view it, I think there's a very clear and deterministic way to make all those conversions occur such that your CAC actually justifies your LTV by a certain large multiple. With regards to thinking about it, I don't think, if a founder isn't thinking about it from day one, then I don't think the business is actually like going to make it in some sense. So it is actually very, very important. And I stood corrected on this. I think a lot of people, I used to build like willy nilly and think, oh, it'll figure itself out. But now as I look at like numbers, this is like the first thing I think about.
No, that's really useful, framework for someone who's, thinking about, of course, bootstrapping, but also how to think in numbers, right? So, Jason, Solana itself is a more like a, vibrant ecosystem, I would say. And there's, so many talented founders and builders in the ecosystem itself that it, by culture contradict itself from the Ethereum. So, if you like to talk about this a little bit, then who are some of the Solana ecosystem founders that inspires you, or someone you still talk to, or discuss about business and ideas? If you like to give some shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Solana, by virtue of being so meritocratic, attracts some of the most high quality founders that I've ever seen. I mean, these people are cracked. They are so good at what they do that you tend to have just learning conversations all the time. People I would give a specific shout out to that have deep both left brain and right brain expertise in both building and selling in a deeply meaningful way. I think are the founders of squads. I think are really really strong at doing this. The second is backpack. I think backpack's done a phenomenal job of assembling a killer team and like building out a killer product. We've seen that with the distribution and like revenues that they've built out in the last few months. It's all like really grown and scaled. But if you think about it, it's taken some time for it to hit escape velocity. And I think that's the beauty of the journey. The founders have always been persistent with it. That I think has been like quite different and differentiated. The third, I think, would be like Forma. Farhaj is one of my closest friends. He we started the company together almost half a decade ago, and he is also like a killer operator that like has very good instinct to taste for what works, what doesn't, how distribution works, how the typical internet mind actually thinks. And these are like people that have really strong astute insights that I actually look up to, that have been consistently rolling out really important things in the ecosystem. But of course, I mean, every odd day you're shocked by the kind of people that come up. Recently, one of our users reached out and said, he's a doctor that lives in New York. And it stunned me because I was like, wait a minute, like, why is a doctor that lives in New York using products on Solana? Like, that makes like no sense. And then I thought about it. It's like Solana is for everyone. And that actually is what has led to a lot of serendipity. And so I think it makes a non-trivial value to choosing the right people to build around, I think.
No, that makes really sense. And love to hear those stories about how you sort of fostered that environment where like users are reaching out to you guys and sharing those stories, because I think it's rare and something that needs to happen quite often in the space. Um, Amazing. So Jason, just to address maybe the retail side of Cesto. So let's say if um, talking about the annualized return, because we are talking about the baskets. So you have also been in the shoes where you ran diligence on other people's companies. So if you have to look at it from an investor's point of view, or if you were reviewing Cesto, which I'm sure you would be doing. So how would you pressure test those annualized return numbers, and at the same time make sure that your retention is also reflecting with that number. So what's your intent rule for which window get displayed, especially with the baskets?
Yeah, we think about it very analytically. So there's a lot of like data that goes into understanding like what is the specific news item that comes up, and then stack ranking it against all the other things that we could be doing, kind of like an opportunity cost math that we do. And yeah, and then really figuring out how to drive specific usage to it. So the images, the conversions, it's a lot of like just A/B testing almost with users. And it's not A/B testing in the conventional sense because user base needs to be large enough for you to do that. But it's literally sending people and saying, kind of like an optician, hey, is this work better or does this work better? And then really coming up with like specific baskets and themes that actually like resonate with people over time. I think that process will become largely over time, like that taste building process will become largely codified, and that's the bit I'm most excited about over time, because once you develop that like unique user insight on like what works, what doesn't, how people interact with these things, that suddenly creates a compounding effect. And for us, we're seeing early semblances of that right now.
Nice. And just to speak about the users, right? Which pattern do you see in terms of demographics when it comes to the type of users finding the most value from Cesto? So maybe like if you can share about some of those data, then would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our user typically sits between the age bracket of like 18 to 35, and comes from pretty much like a varied background, right? These baskets are very diverse. Think the MetaDAO basket, as an example, comes, a crypto user that like wants to get exposure to MetaDAO as an ecosystem. But then you have things like the Nancy Pelosi tracker that has like a very different kind of audience that comes up. And so the most common pattern that we see in terms of users are people that are opinionated, directional with their worldview, don't want to put in the time or effort into maintaining positions, which typically is what takes up a lot of time, are not capital sensitive in that regard, and then just enabling them to like find and discover the product. So I think like earlier it was a problem of awareness, but now it's definitely like now that we've built a certain level of trust, by shipping in public and showing up consistently. Now the problems become about, okay, moves away from like the top of the funnel to more like bottom of the funnel stuff. Like how do you like manage customer support? How do you actually like accommodate some of these people over time? So the demographics so far have been really, really very subset.
Nice. So maybe let's also talk about the sector and the forward lens for for you as a founder and for Cesto. So speaking about prediction markets, so Polymarket is also in your stack maybe, and also like Calci. So what does a prediction market lag actually do inside an investment basket? And is it like a position you hold, or is it like a price signal that you rebalance the rest of the basket against? So especially for the prediction, let's say those who find more value out of predictions.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with prediction markets, what's really interesting is people see them as almost pseudo gambling like tools. But the reality is they're actually really good insurance mechanisms. They're really good to hedge against like world outcomes. Imagine a world where one of the ways in which you were representing a worldview, if you think AI is going to go up, is buying Nvidia. But now all of a sudden you can buy Nvidia, you can buy longs on Nvidia, and you can buy like prediction market positions that Nvidia will hit the quarterly earnings report alongside a whole host of others. Now, this suddenly presents a way you can stay delta neutral, but have exposure to a specific like worldview where you're capping losses on both ends, your gains and losses at both ends, right? And that I think is fundamentally what this unlocks as a tool that no one actually thinks deeply enough about. And when you actually bundle some of these things together, you now have a really interesting instrument. And that for us is what baskets are. Within the next 5 years, I wouldn't be surprised if like all of Robinhood and like all of these platforms that do like billions of dollars of like a volume every single like month go on to actually successfully integrate products like this, because they effectively allow the user to represent their worldview in a more coherent way, so to speak. And yeah, we're very bullish about it, and that's why all of Cesto's baskets do contain prediction market positions as well.
Yeah. So it's nice that you mentioned, Robinhood, Jason, because I think it's an interesting angle to discuss as well. So if I'm not mistaken, right, the current user base of Robinhood might somewhat resonate with maybe your ICPs or your audience that you want to target, because these users already know about the stocks, they know about the equity, they know about the investment, and some of user base might also be familiar very well with the crypto, right? So did you also like think at some point of maybe integrating Robinhood maybe in the future as well, because recently it got a good amount of traction as at least from the Robinhood chain. So what was that like? Did you also like find it surprising and maybe slightly think about maybe integrating with them?
Absolutely. I mean, as I view it right now, we have no intention of integrating Robinhood just yet. It's very much focused on Solana and like the go to market and roadmap and the assets of Solana. And part of it is just because we have all the assets and things needed to prove out viability on market movement, specifically in this realm.
All right, and let's talk about a little bit about the AI agents, because Solana is also probably a ecosystem where a lot of people are also building around agentic application layers. So, and after looking at the docs or at Cesto, you guys also have provided the AI skills like Cesto skills. So maybe if you can also share a little bit about that, if any of our audience or are also builders and want to somehow take a look at it and find some value out of it.
Yeah, 100%. So far, Cesto allows you to create baskets in two ways. We see AI as a tool that would enable people to create these baskets or represent their worldview. You don't have to code, you don't have to bootstrap liquidity, you don't have to like. So earlier, building products like this used to be largely a developer activity as well as a financial heavy activity. But now all of a sudden, with strong opinions about the world and like being able to research very foundational things, AI is a very strong catalyst for people, building exactly what they're looking for. I've seen people build out things that let them arbitrage or move things around in a really interesting way that wouldn't have been possible before. These are people that have had maybe some amount of financial literacy, maybe not too much, that are now able to do that in a deeply meaningful way. And for us at Cesto, I think enabling this audience to successfully go out and build things that they like and they deeply engage with is really important. And I think AI is one of those tools that enables you to do that. So what we have is a product called Cesto Labs that lets you use AI to actually go build it out. And I encourage everyone in your audience to actually go out and try it out, because it's quite a fun experience. I've tried it out a number of times, and I always get a dopamine hit from just doing it.
Nice, for sure. And just to talk about the AI. So as a founder, Jason, what sort of AI workflows have you been specifically exploring? Maybe if you can share some of the insights from your AI native workflows, or tool stack that you think every founder out there needs to use, especially on the distribution side, also on the development side.
Yeah, 100%. So we use a lot of different tools, but interestingly, they're largely deterministic tools. So there aren't actually like necessarily always AI agents internally, but we use it for a variety of purposes across like sales, partnerships, go to market, and marketing. And mainly, the goal there is to free up time so that we're able to amplify in a very specific way. So we have different systems. Like we built out an internal OS that covers. It's like where a to-do list meets a chat terminal meets WhatsApp, and Telegram meets our CRM in a really meaningful way. So once you have like something like that that uniquely works for you and your company, you're tracking the right data, you're tracking the right things, and you're doubling down by viewing the right things over time. For us, that's been like deeply meaningful because it's created a really big unlock. We currently have maybe 1,500 different like open channels with different people, companies, like whatever it is, and that that results in so much noise at times. But now all of a sudden, we have a way to manage the noise. So we can push like updates out. We can engage with people in a deeply meaningful way, find specific ideas in the community because we're doing it at scale. And so I think that upfront investment of time in building some of this out has just created a mental unlock. Now that I can do it myself, I'm constantly pushing updates to our internal OS every time we need it. And now the marginal effort of doing it is very low. But once it gets deployed, the ROI on it is just insane. I mean, I think I saved like hundreds of hours just doing the same things. And so we do this across the board for distribution, go to market, marketing, sales, like all together. And it's been really effective. I think when we go out to hire like, a head of sales or lead like on marketing, what I think would happen, the very likely outcome is that you would now have all of these things come together in a deeply meaningful way.
Perfect. And just to double down on that, what's the one tool that everyone usually recommend you, but you would stop using that, or not touch at all?
Yeah, good
Any?
question. I think for me that one is OpenClaw. The whole like OpenClaw fad, I just kind of skipped it altogether. I mean, it was interesting where it lasted, but it did not serve my product brain as deeply as I wanted. So I just kind of stopped using it altogether.
Cool. Awesome. And Jason, I think the next part is going to be, we wanted to, you know, we wanted your takes on any tips for maybe emerging founders or someone who's especially building in, crypto early on. So someone who's submitting to Solana hackathon this month, because you have reviewed, other applications, and you've also, successfully been through some of those. So what's one thing that they should, change in the submission this week? And what's the, thing that everyone needs to include in their applications, especially for applying to like a hackathon?
Yeah, good question. I think definitely brand and start with your pitch a lot earlier. These are some of the tips that, like, in no particular order. Start with it earlier. Try to get on the radar of the judges early on. Talk to them about things you're passionate about, things that mean a lot to you, like in a really meaningful way. I think nothing like that. It really unlocks a lot of like value and creates a lot of clarity for a lot of people. So that's probably the one I would actively say is going to create a ton of movement and value. And then I guess like second to this is, if you're thinking about building a company, have a roadmap and a plan beyond the hackathon, right? So a lot of people fall short because they're always looking at it as like, okay, I'm going to do this for the next 4 weeks. But if you have like a plan that carries on beyond, then people, want to back you. They want to be part of your journey because you're on a mission. You're out to execute, and you will out execute people on that mission, right? So it's very, very important to actually get that right.
No, for sure, really makes sense. And Jason, you have also mentored, a couple of startups in your past life, or probably you are also might be doing that right now. So, what's the most common thing you tell a consumer crypto founder to stop doing, in their first meeting?
Yeah, 100%. I think like iterating in private is just like, don't do it, specifically because I think you should start like talking to your users early on. We do that like every day at Cesto. It's very important, a thing for us. Um, I'd say that's probably it. Like, I think a lot of people get in their head about feedback, but I think the game with product market fit is one where it just needs to work once. So you need to try out different experiments. Um, Even pump.fun started out as a really simple like app, simple product, but that was like one among maybe 20 iterations of the same like concept done in different ways. And a lot of the times, well, like the contrarian worldview here is your users will not tell you what they want because they don't know what they want. And so you just literally have to iterate and put things in front of them constantly. And that's what we did across a few different like things. Start with the hypotheses, go in and validate it by talking to people, and then after that you go out and scale that up over time. And yeah, so that would be my most concrete like piece of feedback. We're trying different things out at Cesto as well, so I'm happy to tell you how that like answer evolves over time.
No, I really love that. But yeah, Jason. So before we wrap this up, I usually end this episodes with a particular pattern that we try to extract from founders. So what was that one working principle that you recently changed or implemented in how you operate, especially while building Cesto, which you also recommend other founders to do, which help them with their operations and their operator journey?
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that we changed actively is moving away from being just a tech company to being a tech company and a media company, more importantly. And so when you start to look at it with that lens, you start to view Moat's brand and like a whole host of things very, very differently. And I think that is something that I strongly recommend people do. I think working with folks like yourself creates like a lot of really interesting opportunities for founders to actually like build that up over time. I think, like I said, it's really competitive out there, and I think this is like one of the ways in which you can go ahead and differentiate yourself.
Awesome, for sure. But yeah, thank you so much for all of the insights, Jason. I think this has been a wonderful discussion. And usually these are the type of conversations we strive to achieve. So, appreciate you taking the time for this. But yeah, if you have any, call to action for our audience who's watching this episode, feel free to do a shout out. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm Jason Rodrigues on X. You can see it on my handle. But that said, we're coming up with a few different like big announcements at Cesto. So the best way to find out is to go onto our Twitter, like Cesto_co. We have 30 odd thousand people community that we've built up over time. But that said, I read every single message, every single DM that comes in. So if you have interest in like specific baskets, or you want to create a basket, or you're interested in this like broad domain, shoot me a message. I'd love to catch up and chat more about the worldview and see how we can work together potentially. So I'm pretty excited, and I'm always chronically online, so you'll find me somewhere.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason, and thanks for the call, shout out. And for anyone who's watching or listening to this episode, I'll be sure to put all of the links about Cesto, about how to reach out to Jason, his social media links as well. So feel free to give them a follow and join their mission, I would say. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching this, and we'll see you on the next one. So until then, keep building.
Thank you. Have a great day.